Hello and welcome to the Bethlehem Icon School online. In today's session we're going to be taking a look at garments, and I hope that after a little bit of instruction you'll be left feeling much more confident and able to draw icons with real spiritual elegance. Okay, so here we are back onto our familiar example that we've been looking at. And I want to look today at how we illuminate, how we paint the garment. Okay, and it's only going to be a brief introduction, just to try and take you from the drawing stage now into the painting stage, so you can really understand what you're looking at. Now, what I've done here is I've actually isolated the highlighting. So if I take that off, can you see that little section there? Okay. So we're going to be looking just at this section and how we build that up. So if you look at this here, you've got one color that's going all the way across, which is this sort of grayish color just here. So this sort of color here is what we're looking at. Now that's what we call the proplasmos. And this is actually underneath all of the garment. But some areas that look darker, so for example, this area here, are made darker by the use of washes. So you've got an original color, and then at the end, you wash in other colors especially into the shadows. So be very careful when you're looking at an icon, especially an old one, and you're looking and trying to say, well, what color is it? What color is the proplasmos? What's that first color that I've got to get down? It's very easy to sort of get a bit lost and try and work out what's happening. That is the original color. That's your proplasmos color that I put on the screen. This little circle, as I move it around, is showing the colors underneath. See that top half of the circle? So if you bring it over here, you can see that's the color of the proplasmos. So when you see those darker colors, like the shadow area here, as I was saying, or the lighter colors here, these are the ones which have been laid on top of that first layer, that proplasmos. Now, when you've got an old icon like this, you can sometimes find yourself getting a bit lost because you're being distracted by, for example, these cracks along here, which looks as though they are actually caused by somebody scratching through it, or it got damaged in some way like that. And then you've got the splits in the wood you see here, and that then go across. Very old icons very, very rarely will have no damage to them. Maybe if you've got illuminated manuscripts, because they're protected by the leaves of the book, they can be in really, really pristine condition. But when it comes to icons themselves on panels, when they get to this age, you're going to have bits that are missing. So if you can understand what is supposed to be there, then when you've got an icon like this, you can understand it. If I now go back to that layer, so that's your layer, as it were, your proplasmos, and then on the top you've got that. So can you see what's appearing as dark is actually just the proplasmos, and you're creating shapes which give the form of that leg. You can see where that first layer of color, that first highlighting layer, is going. And notice that it's solid underneath where it's brightest, but then it's blending. So when you look at it like this, and you see this area here, all the way sort of here is the color on top of the Proplasmos, but it's going from here and then blending across. And only here is it really, really thicker. So that you've got, can you see how that's blending? You've got the strong area there, and then it's blending across to here. So then you see you've got some very sharp edges, and then you've got these blends. Now the sharp edges, if you notice, is actually giving you the creases. And then to give the sense of the rounded thigh, it's blending with the color underneath. And you can do blending either using water, just to thin it gradually as it comes across, or hatch lines, which have the same effect. Now, if you notice, we're actually giving, the shadow gives form, and here the shadowing, the blending, is giving us the form. This is on the side of the knee and the thigh, and then the cloth pulling round over the hip. And the roundedness of the muscle on the thigh and on the knee is being given by that blending. The sharp shapes are giving the creases or the folds in the cloth as it pulls in those different directions, just as it did when we were drawing it. So at this stage, with your first layer of highlight, is when you establish the form. If you haven't got the form right at this point, you're not going to get it right when you start to highlight further, because next comes this. Now, can you see the difference? So you see that's on much of the same area, but not as much. Next, you would get this. You see those final bright highlights. They're not put everywhere, they're very minimum, and I can show you that more easily by doing that. Now, can you see how, without that middle layer, which I've just taken off, those highlights don't really sit on the on the garment. They look more as though they've just been, it's a bit like lipstick or makeup that's just been slapped on. They don't look organic to the composition. And this is something which a lot of beginners or amateur painters get wrong every time. So this is really the thing I want to sort of really get through to you today, is you've got to create the right, as it were, steps between one color and the other. Because if you don't, instead of sitting together, nestling together, they're just stuck on top of each other and don't have a unity. And as a result, instead of looking like a glowing light, it looks like somebody's got some paint and slapped it on there. Having established that that's the basic principle, I now want to just show you three different pieces of work. So it's for illustration purposes, really, to help you to understand what I've been doing and the process from the beginning. Now, I've shown you how to draw, and the method that I use for doing garments, which is a sort of blend of the membrane technique and the Proplasmos technique. The way that I start is to draw with the brush. So you can see here, this is St. Elizabeth, and I've drawn everything calligraphically with a brush. In this case, I've just used one color for everything. Now the headdress is going to be a white headdress, but I need to establish its form through these lines and by establishing shadows. So the first stage is blocking in the shadows with a blue color. I want this to be a blue, but to the white. So I'm looking at where the shadows need to go. On the side of the head there, because the head is round and it's going round to the back. Likewise, the inside of her headdress is in shadow, so I put the shadow in. And you can see that where the folds are being, when it's one cloth on top of the other, where there's shadow in there, you've got a stronger dark line and then a washier color being put in. So at this point, I'm drawing with the brush and shading with the brush as I would do if I was drawing with a pencil. So you see how that's gradually building up. And it's really quite dark in places, but where I want it to be really bright and white, I'm leaving the gesso. Now, okay, so can you see that you can see where it's going to be bright because I've just left the gesso. And this means when I put the white over it, that is going to have a real radiance. Now, I'm now going to show you another garment, but this time it's going to end up being a blue garment. So even though I've started off with both of them, when you say the symbol box, that's this one. Yeah, it doesn't take away from what you're looking at, okay? So now I'm going to show you a blue cloak. And you can see here exactly the same principle, putting in those shadows, but this time I'm going to make sure that the shadow areas are going to be really quite strong. So again, I'm giving it form. See how dark that's going there. Now, so you've got this basic process by which you create your form by giving this membrane underneath. So in contrast to what we saw earlier using the Archangel Gabriel, where I was just letting the Proplasmos give the lines, in this process, I'm actually creating the form before I'm putting the color on the top. So two different processes, which I then combine. But I just want you to understand that there are two routes, as it were, to get to the final destination. So in this one, which I think probably a lot of people find easier, you actually put your lines on, you put your shadows on just as you would with pencil. With the previous one, with the Archangel Gabriel, you're actually putting a massive color and then creating your form by your first highlight and leaving that darker color, the Proplasmos, showing through. Now, so now I want to look at, you remember last week, let me just finish this off. See how dark that has to go on that side. Now, do you remember last week I drew those folds? Those are exactly the same folds at the bottom of the angel's garment that we drew last week. So I transferred that sketch onto my board, and you can see the red transfer lines. And now I've begun to put in the membrane. So I'm going over the basic shapes. Remember, keeping those arrow shapes, those triangles, and I'm put in the shadow areas. So if you look here, now you can clearly see that that's a shadow, and therefore these are folds coming forwards. This fold is on top of all of those. That shadow pushes that behind. Here, that little shadow pushes this bit of cloth behind that, but it comes up, and then you've got this fold on the top of that one. So just the same way that we did with drawing. And there you can see my blue color. It's not too dense, not too thick, because as it goes over, I want the membrane to be showing through. And this is one of the joys of using tempera, because tempera is so thin. You build up your thin layers, and so you can put your shadows in first, put these washes of color over, you get the form and you get the unity. So let's see what happens. So here you can see that thin washy line, and notice the direction that I'm putting the lines on. I'm following the direction of the folds. So actually, as you put each brush stroke, as you can see here, for example, you see where it's overlapping from that previous one, it's a little darker. So the fact that it's going to make streaky lines which are on the thing doesn't become a problem, because it's like the cloth itself would do. It echoes the direction on which you're actually creating the folds. Putting that in, you see I started on that darker area, and then as I got less and less on my brush, I'm going into the brighter areas. So again, I'm using the paint and its qualities to the maximum. So it's not just randomly putting it over. So now you can see the membrane giving you the shadow, and that lighter area is created not by putting any white into the paint, but by allowing the radiancy of the white ground to come through. So you're using the ground, the board, to help you paint. It's not just a surface to hold the paint. It's actually helping you to give the shapes and forms. I'm mixing paint to make sure it's nice and mixed. See, I'm going into the darker areas first, lighter areas later, so that and actually you can see how the paint is beginning to run out. So the dark, if you look at the darker area here and the darker area here, that's a shade darker, and that's just simply because there's more paint on your brush. Now, once you've got it to that stage, you then need to think about making the highlights. So I've got my original color and I put a little black into that. You can see it mixing, and now I put some white into that mixture, only at this stage. And this, mixed quite a white color, and now I'm going to put it back into the blue, which is going to give me a medium color. So I've got my white highlight, which is actually a grayish white, and then I've put some of that into the original color, which has given me a halfway step between the color that I've just painted on here and the final highlight color that I'm going to put on. Again, remember when I took the middle layer out and it ended up looking as though the paint was just stuck on the top. This is where things really get difficult for people. It's getting the middle color right that's the real challenge, because you want it to step up rather than to be stuck on. So you want to step up so that the eye glides rather than being hit in the face by makeup. It's not a clown with makeup on. It's an organic piece. So now I'm going to not do the middle layer. I'm going to go straight through to the highlight. And the only reason I'm doing that is because when I took the video, for some reason, I missed taking the bit in the middle. So I apologize. Let's bring that now. There we are. That's where I want to stop. So can you see here? I've begun to put that grayish blue underneath this area. See where I put where I'm putting the mouse. So the highlight is on this side. I've left that. I've put this on in this way, and this way, this little bit side of the fold, because that's going in that direction, it's folding inwards. By putting the sort of hash lines on, it creates or emphasizes the way in which the garment is folding. Okay, so even something as simple as putting the direction of your lines, because it's so translucent, this wouldn't perhaps be the same in, I don't know, acrylic, but certainly with tempera, because it's so transparent, and the way the lines fold really make a difference. And then I'm going to come back and now put on the final highlighting lines. Of course, you can only see my thumb at the moment, but can you see just literally just little touches, and very much thin, thick, thin, because if you get a thin to thick point, you've got less paint going to more paint. So it's a way of blending by just putting less paint on with a thin point and then a more with a thicker point. And here, just touching the edge of those highlights. So you see how I've now got built up a brightness at certain points. Now, one of the things about white, especially on blue, is it absorbs it. So you have to put it on sometimes several times to get it to really take. And can you see here what I was doing, making sure I got the folds in, making sure that they go round, that the brightness covers that and then fades out around the crease.